Well, good evening, everybody. My name's Nigel, this is Rachel, and I'm one of the pastors at Cheam Baptist Church. It's really good to have you join with us for this evening together. We're really thankful to Jerry Marshall, who's our guest this evening, and who we'll be talking to in a moment's time, and I'll introduce him to us in a few minutes. We're thankful that he's going to share with us something of his experience of living as a Christian with incurable cancer.
We're aware that the topic is heavy and perhaps personally hard to face, but we hope it will be helpful for us all to listen in. As we go along, there's opportunity to ask questions to Jeremy using the chat function on Zoom. So please do send through any of your questions, as Jeremy has kindly and bravely agreed that anything can be asked, and we'll have a look at the questions at the end.
So Jeremy, thanks so much for joining with us this evening, giving up your evening to do that. Just start off perhaps by telling us where you are. We're all sort of joining in from different lounges or rooms this evening, but whereabouts are you? And then something of who you are, your family. That
sure. Sort of yeah, I'm just around the M25 in Kent. I'm afraid I don't quite make it into Surrey, and I'm also on the wrong side of the M25, I guess. So in Sevenoaks Junction 5, and I'm here with my wife Jeanette. We've got 3 children. 2 are living away, although one of them's been here a lot of the lockdown period. Our daughter Naomi's in Cambridge. Our son Sam is in Manchester, and we've got our older son, our middle child, Nat. He's here, but he's had enough, so he's moving out. He's working in a tech company, so he's going to move to Camden Town and spend some time away escaping from his parents.
So you'll be in tier 1. We're here right on the edge of tier 2, where we are in Cheam, in Sutton. I was talking to a group of people who work for the NHS earlier today, and talking of something of the losses that we've all felt through these last 6 months living in lockdown. What's lockdown been like for you? What are some of the things that you've missed particularly? Yeah,
it's been quite hard because as we'll come on to in a minute, I've been living with cancer, and I've been most of lockdown. Actually, I've been in chemotherapy, so I've got no immune system. I've also was in hospital for a while with heart issues. They still don't know what it was, but it could have been actually linked to coronavirus. So in the last 5 and indeed even 8 years, I've had cancer. And what I'd say to everybody in a cheery way is welcome to my world, because in the last 5 years especially, every time someone coughed or sneezed, I felt afraid. I wake up in the morning thinking, well, am I going to die? And life was full of uncertainty and fear. And now everybody feels like that, right? So it's been quite hard in lockdown. And yeah, it's hard not to see I've got 3 sisters and a mother. It's hard not to see them and just to keep away from people, really. So I haven't been in a shop, a pub or a restaurant or on public transport since about the 10th of March. And I've just finished chemotherapy a couple of weeks ago. So hopefully by January, February, I'll be okay. Well, I'm not planning. My wife would kill me if I go crazy. So I'll still be behaving sensibly. At least that's what she tells me the marching orders are.
Yeah. And Jeremy, something of what was life like for you, sort of going back before 5 or 6 years ago? What did you do, kind of working life? What have you experienced?
Yeah. So I grew up actually the other way around the N25 in Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire, a town which is famous for one thing, a kind of roundabout where you can go both ways around it, which is not very exciting. So actually I got out of Hemel as soon as I could. And I worked all over the world in private banking. And then about a dozen years ago, I became chief executive of a family-owned private bank. Knowing Cheam, I imagine some of the people watching have got accounts there. Your secret's quite safe with me. So it's a very old family bank called C. Hoare & Co., which is still owned by the Hoare family. It's 350 years old, and I was fortunate enough to be the first ever non-family CEO. It's got a fantastic office in Fleet Street. It's been there since 1690. It's complete with fountains, courtyards, old masters. I imagine, Nigel, your office at the church is probably a bit similar. So it was really a dream job, and a job I absolutely loved.
What were some of the things you really enjoyed in it? I mean, I guess for a lot of us, that's a different world that you must.
Yeah, dealing with very wealthy people is fun. I mean, wealthy people are interesting. Some of them are a bit eccentric. Some of them are quite difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
One interesting thing about that was that I think it showed me that having a lot of money doesn't make you happy. One of the things that, you know, advertising tells us is, you know, if you win the lottery or if you make a lot of money, then you're happy. But that's not been my experience. Of course, other things being equal, it's easier to have a lot of money than to live, say, on a rubbish tip in Rio de Janeiro. But some of the very rich people I met were really miserable because money can kind of permeate and destroy a family. You often get this saying, clogs to clogs, right? So the kind of, usually the man makes all the money, then the next generation is sort of made dysfunctional by it, and the third generation blow it all. So you're back to square one.
Yeah.
You know, Jim Carrey, the actor, said, I wish everyone could have their dreams come true, so that they could see that having their dreams come true doesn't make them happy. And definitely dealing with very wealthy people, billionaires, that shows that that's the case. People pursue this dream of being, you know, 100 million, 500 million, a billion. But I can tell you, even people with 500 million, this may make you laugh, think they're actually poor and they haven't got enough. And if only they had another few hundred, then they would be really happy.
Yeah.
So they're sort of like a hamster on a wheel and they can't get off the wheel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess in some of the people you've just talked about, and even for yourself, working in that job for a period of time, that the expectation of what the future might hold, I don't know, was maybe fairly fixed for you. You've written a book about some of your experiences of being diagnosed with cancer. We're going to mention the book at the end if people want a copy of it. It'll elaborate on something of what you shared tonight. But I think in the book you talk about, or use the illustration of being on a train and sort of knowing something of what the destination is, but then suddenly with the cancer diagnosis, that destination is looking very different. Tell us about that. Yeah, what happened? When did that happen for you?
Yeah, that's right, Nigel. It's like being on a comfortable train going into London, and you know the destination you have in mind is retirement, you know, 65 or whatever. Of course, there is another destination after that. Maybe it's a bit like going to London Bridge and there's Charing Cross, and Charing Cross is death, right? But we don't like to think about that because that's an awkward topic. And then suddenly there's a jolt, and I said in the book, it's like the Grim Reaper enters the carriage and sits opposite you and starts looking at you. And the Grim Reaper for me was cancer, but the Grim Reaper for all of us in a way now is coronavirus. So yeah, 8 years ago, in brief, I found a tiny lump on my ribs. I got referred to the Marsden, which is in Sutton, and the other one in central London. And they said, you've got this rare type of cancer. It's called a sarcoma, a type of sarcoma, which is cancer of the muscle tissue. But we've caught it early, you should be fine. I went through treatment for about 6 months. And then for about 2.5 years, everything went back to normal. And then one day, 5 years ago, I was at a friend's house here in Sevenoaks having dinner. And I went to adjust my collar as we were eating. And I felt this massive lump here on my collarbone. Not like a tiny pea, the first one, but like a golf ball. And yeah, with that was the jolt, if you like, because I knew straight away what it was. I knew it was cancer. I told the people, look, I'm sorry, I feel ill. I need to go home. I told my wife on the way home. I went back to the hospital. They ran some tests. And then a day that sticks in my mind, Friday, the 13th of June, I was sitting in the waiting room at the Marsden. The nurse said, please come through. We walked down a little corridor. She said, I'm really sorry. And that was the only warning I had. When I went into the room, there were lots of people there. And they said, look, we're really sorry. We don't know how we missed this because I've been going through all the screening. And actually, about 18 months later, they decided it was a completely different type of cancer, small cell lung cancer. But you've got tumours everywhere. And unlike the first time, there's not really a great deal we can do. We can't cure you. So, of course, the question you ask, Nigel, is, well, how long do you think I've got? Now, they always say, well, we don't exactly know, blah, blah, blah. But they said, okay, 18 months. So with that, I burst into tears. And please don't think if you're watching this, I'm some kind of expert on cancer or let alone a super Christian. There's no such thing, by the way. No, I'm afraid of cancer and afraid of dying. And the other bad thing about cancer is the impact it has on your family, because my wife was with me when this happened, but I had to come home and then our children were all at university. So we did a sort of cheery death drive around the UK, sort of going to each of them. I didn't want to tell them on the phone. Although when we turned up unexpectedly at one of them, he thought we'd come to tell him the dog had died, and actually the dog's still alive, as am I, right? So that was really hard. Now, since then, if you read about a hospital crisis or overload, I'm the person responsible. So I've had 30 chemotherapies, I've had a dozen operations. I was also blind for a while. I lost the sight in both eyes, although I've got it back in one eye. It's amazing, by the way, how low the legal requirement for being able to drive is. So watch out if I come around to the M25 and you're part of it. And it's been really, really hard, but I am still alive. And what happens is the chemo shrinks the tumors, and then when I stop, it starts growing again, and then we start chemotherapy again. As you can see, my hair falls out, but it does come back eventually. I was hoping it would come back blonde and curly, but sadly not. So yeah, that's been my life in the last 5 years, living under the sort of sword of Damocles. But again, that's sort of what we've all been experiencing, I think. And in a way, you know, the title of my book is Beyond the Big C. It came out just before lockdown. It's about cancer, but the big C could be coronavirus, and it's the same principle.
Yeah, yeah. And just where things are for you now, Jeremy, you talked, I think, earlier on about not long ago finishing a round of chemo. Sort of what's the situation for you as far as you know?
Yeah, as I mentioned, Nigel, what happens is, you know, in a couple of weeks I have another scan, and then every 2 months I have another scan, and then sooner or later they say, okay, they're growing again and reached a certain size, time for chemo again. So I wish hospital gave frequent flyer points, because yeah, it's hard to go through chemotherapy. And what I would say is that the thing that's kept me going, you know, in the last 5 years has been the presence of God in my life. Now, I was a Christian before all this happened, but it's kind of an acid test, right? And some people, when they have a diagnosis like that, you know, feel very angry with God, which is fine, by the way. God can cope with our emotions. But what I've found is that maybe the single thing about treatment is it's very lonely. My wife has come along with me to all the treatments, but she couldn't come in coronavirus. And when I was in hospital, I was in Harefield Hospital actually for heart problems. She couldn't come then either. So you're kind of stuck on your own. And sometimes you go, which I won't go into the gory details, you go through rather unpleasant procedures, and you feel afraid. And then I remember the words of God, I'll never leave you or forsake you. Or Jesus said to his disciples, and I believe says to anyone who will follow him, look, I'm with you always, even to the very end of the age. And maybe the most famous chapter in the Bible is the 23rd Psalm. Some of you may know it, the Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. Well, the verse after that but one says, yes, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And that's been my experience, that I have been walking through the valley of the shadow of death, and death does cast a shadow, and that shadow is cast really on all of us to some extent in 2020. But I do fear it, but I have something that comforts me, which is the presence of God, and that makes a massive difference to my life. It also gives me hope. We'll come on to that in a minute, but I believe there is an answer to death. I believe that there is something that as Christians we want to offer, which is hope in the face of death. And this is not because we're good people. We're not. I'm a banker, right? You don't get much more of a bad person than that. I don't know, maybe estate agents or politicians or something. No offense to any watching. But Christians are not bad people, are not good people. They're bad people. They're people, if you like, who have discovered that they have a disease and that they need a doctor. And the answer, I believe, and if you're watching this and you're a Christian, is Jesus Christ. And you know, I can explain why in a minute. But that makes a radical difference to me, because it means that there is an answer to death. Yeah,
which is just huge. I think you're right that I think when you talked about we don't think about death as a culture. An occupational hazard for me is funerals. So I'm at the crematorium or the graveside too often. So for me, I'm confronted with death and the questions around it. I think generally as a society, we've pushed it away. We don't think about it. And this year, for all of us, or when times like what you're going through come our way, it forces that question. I think with it, quite often people ask the question of, particularly around suffering, why does God allow it, or coronavirus even? How do you answer that? I guess you've had to answer that personally over these last few months or years.
Yeah, that's not a theoretical question. That's a real live question for me. Yeah. I would say the Christian message, Nigel, is is this. One, something's gone wrong because God made everything good in the beginning. Evil, suffering, death, they're like intruders, if you like. Imagine you're in your house and you hear this noise of breaking glass in the night. You realize there are 3 intruders in your house and you can't get them out. And one of them is fear and one is suffering, but the third one, death, is going to get you eventually. So the Bible tells us that God made everything good, but that evil entered the world. And I think if we look around, there's obviously natural evil, right? Coronavirus, cancer, earthquakes. But if we're honest, there's also evil in each one of us, things we've done wrong, what the Bible calls sin. And those have broken our relationship with God. We're also, at least I am anyway, you have to answer for yourself, we're rebels, right? We kind of given God 2 fingers and said, no, I don't want to do it your way, I want to do it my way. And the Christian message is that the world is a mess. And the question, well, why doesn't God do something about it? Why doesn't he deal with evil, suffering and death? It is a great one because it comes right to the heart of the Christian message. So the Christian claim is this, that God did do something about it. And the answer is not a theological framework or a philosophical belief. He came in person 2,000 years ago to an obscure corner of the Roman Empire and lived a life and went around doing miracles, the like of which had never been seen, raising people from the dead, healing the sick, feeding thousands of people. And what's even more amazing than that is not only was God incarnate, which means to become a human being, but that he went through the same fear and suffering as we do. And I find that immensely comforting. And also mean God is not a remote God, but he's a personal God. So Jesus, the night before he was arrested and then crucified, he knew what was coming. In fact, he came to die. His death wasn't a tragic mistake. It was the whole purpose of his coming to live with us. And he was in a garden called Gethsemane, and he was afraid. And he said, Father, if it's your will, take this cup away from me, but let not my will, but your will be done. And by the cup, he meant the cup of suffering, because Jesus had a choice of whether to die or not. I don't have a choice, right? And none of us do. At some point, we're all going to die. You know, Benjamin Franklin famously said, you can avoid everything in life except death and taxes. Having worked in private banking, I can tell you that's not altogether true. But you can't avoid death, can you? No, it's the one thing in life that you can't avoid. But Jesus, who Christians believe was perfect, could have avoided death, but he took the cup. He went to the cross. Well, why did he do that? Two reasons, I believe. One, that was the only way to, if you like, pay the bill for all the things we've done wrong, or all the evil in our life. That was the only way to take that away. And what motivated him to do that, because nobody likes suffering, and Jesus didn't want to suffer. Jesus, Christians believe, is 100% God and 100% human. So as to his humanity, he did not want to suffer. He did not want to die. What motivated him? Love for me, love for you. And that's the amazing thing, that while we were God's enemies, while we hate God, while we give God 2 fingers and say, go away, God died for us in the person of his son. Just to illustrate this, Nigel, finally, there was a man called Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German pastor, who stood up against the persecution of the Jews in the 1930s. And he was arrested and sent to a concentration camp. And a few weeks before the war was ending, when it was obvious the Nazis were going to lose, he was executed. But just before that happened, he smuggled out of his jail cell a little piece of paper. And on it, he wrote this: only a suffering God can help us. Only a suffering God can help us. That's the Christian claim, that a suffering God can help us, and that Jesus suffered and died in our place to rescue us, to offer us a way out of the mess we're in. And I find that amazing. And as I said earlier, it means, in my view anyway, if you disagree, please feel free to argue the contrary, that there is an answer to death.
Yeah, thank you. I guess to play devil's advocate with that is the question of, you know, given your prognosis, given what you're living with at the moment, isn't this just wishful thinking? I mean, it sounds good and helpful, but is it true? How do you know it's true?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. And sometimes people say to me, Nigel, you know, oh, it's just wishful thinking, right? If I was in your position with maybe, you know, a short period to live, I'd probably think the same. I'd submit to you, first of all, there are 2 broad alternatives. There are actually more than that, but we haven't got time to go into it. But there's 2 broad worldviews. One is the view ably articulated by Professor Richard Dawkins, who says that there is no God and that there is no meaning. He says the universe speaks to us of nothing except blind, pitiless indifference. Blind, pitiless indifference. A famous atheist on his deathbed said to his family, goodbye forever, right? And that's logical, right? If we're just a bunch of chemicals, molecules thrown together at random, then we die and that's it. And there's not even a purpose to evolution, because all that's going on is, DNA is trying to perpetuate itself. Now, I guess I have bad DNA, and I hope you all watching have excellent DNA and live to 100. But ultimately, who cares what happens to your DNA? So that's one view. The Christian view is very, very different. It's that there is a God, a creator God who made the whole universe, who's incomparably great and vast. The universe is 75 trillion light years across, right? That's one pretty big God. And then that God loves us. He made us for himself. That we deviated from that. We've gone off and we've rebelled against him. But he invites us to come back, like the story of the prodigal son, if you remember that, where the prodigal son's in a pigsty and he thinks, this is crazy, I must go back to the father. And that's a picture of us going back to God. Now, in my position, or in any human position, unless you think you've got the answer to death, option 2, I submit, is a lot more cheerful in my position or your position than option 1, right? But it's only helpful if it's true.
Yeah.
It's only helpful if it's true. Otherwise, it is to quote Richard Dawkins, it's the God delusion, right? It's the biggest con trick in history. So Christianity is not based on fairy stories. It's based on evidence. And the reason I'm a Christian, and again, please feel free to poke holes in this if you like. I'm sure all of us who are Christians, we really are just looking for truth, right? We think we found truth. And if you don't agree, then please say so. Is that I believe if I was there with a phone on the morning of AD 33, April the 4th or whenever it was, that I would have been able to record what the 4 eyewitness accounts show, which is that Jesus was dead for 3 days. He died on the cross. He was laid to rest in a tomb, that the stone was rolled away, and that he came back to life. And that he came back to life and was seen by hundreds of people. This wasn't like 1 or 2 people wishful thinking. This was something that was very tangible, and that he spent lots of time with hundreds and hundreds of people. And maybe some of you think, well, how do we know that? Well, I please invite you to look at it for yourself, right? What Christians are claiming is we have the answer to death, and the answer to death is that Jesus Christ came back from the dead 2,000 years ago. And if that did not happen, Christianity is a massive con trick. And if it did happen, and if it's true, then there is an answer to death, and that's more important than anything else that is possibly going on in your life. So the Christian claim is based upon the resurrection, that historically happened. So that's something that happened 2,000 years ago, right? But it also means that now you can know Jesus Christ. This is not, there's all kinds of historical events that happened. Henry VIII had 6 wives. It doesn't do me or you any good. But the Christian claim is that we can know Jesus Christ now. Yes, now, today in 2020. Well, how do we know him? Various ways. But one way is if we look at the eyewitness accounts, I believe he steps off the page of those and steps into your life. And thirdly, it's not only about the past and the present, it's also about the future. The last verse of Psalm 23 is this: surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So where's the Christian going? Where am I going? We're going home. We're going home. That's what going to be with God is, going home. A man called Augustine, writing about 1600 years ago, said, you, God, made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until we find rest in you. We will never find happiness. We will never find fulfillment. We will never find peace until we get right with God. And when we're right with God through trusting in Jesus, trusting in what I've said is true, then we are adopted into the family of God. And then God says, come home with me. And that's wonderful. That's a wonderful, amazing hope for Christians. So thanks for listening. That's my answer, Nigel, that we have hope in the face of death.
Jeremy, thank you. Thanks for explaining something of your story, explaining something of the hope you have as well, and why you have that hope. We're going to sort of pause from the conversation between Jeremy and myself. We invited you at the beginning, if you wanted to ask any questions, to do so through the chat function on Zoom. They're coming through to Rachel's phone, so I've seen her phone buzzing, so I think that means there are some questions coming in. So Rachel's going to try and ask some of the questions that have come from you. If we don't capture quite the way you put the question, it might be that we're trying to put together, perhaps 2 or 3 people have asked the same question, so we're trying to combine those, or Rachel will try and combine those as they come through. But yeah, Rachel, are there any you want to start with?
Yeah, there's a couple here. So, and probably I'll join it with another one. So, does your wife and children have faith? And does this help them cope? And I guess alongside that was the question I had was for many, one big fear of death is who we leave behind. How does your faith help with this?
Yeah. So as I said before, I'm afraid of death. Now, even as a Christian, maybe some of you are Christians think, well, you shouldn't be, right? Well, I'm a human being, right? And death is a terrible enemy. And one of the things that makes death fearful is, separation. Death is about loneliness, right? Being on your own, both the people here on their own and you. There's a wonderful story in the Bible which I find so comforting on this, which you can look at. It's in one of the eyewitness accounts called John. Lazarus is a friend of Jesus who dies. He's got 2 sisters called Mary and Martha. And Jesus knows that Lazarus has died, and he says, our friend Lazarus is asleep. We'll go and wake him up. And what's interesting is that Lazarus is already dead. So as a Christian, Jesus is just as much our friend in death as he is in life. And he's also just as much the friend of the people remaining behind as he is of the people going ahead. In a way, death is like going on a holiday, right? You get there first, and the destination is glorious, but you have to maybe go through, I don't know, Heathrow Airport might be the comparison. That's kind of death. And then you go to the Seychelles or something. That's to go to be with God. So yeah, death is a terrible enemy. And even as Christians, although we believe there's an answer to death, that doesn't mean we have like a kind of get out of jail free card where we just think, oh yeah, everything's great. And it is hard dealing with cancer. And the hardest thing is the impact on family. So yeah, my wife and kids are all at different stages, but I think they would in a way have, I know they would have faith, but it's a struggle sometimes for all of us, and sometimes you have doubts and fears, and that's also okay. It's okay if you're looking into the Christian faith to say, well, I have all kinds of doubts. There's a great story in the Bible which I find really helpful, which is when Jesus is risen from the dead, a man called Thomas just will not believe that Jesus is risen from the dead. He's one of Jesus's 12 followers, and he says, no, you must be joking. In fact, unless I can put my fingers into the nail holes in his wrists and my hand into the spear hole in his side, I'm not going to believe. And that's maybe like a lot of us, and that's maybe like me or my family sometimes, wrestling with things, feeling angry, feeling alone. But the wonderful thing, friends, is Jesus meets him, right? And he says, okay, Thomas, here I am, go ahead, put your fingers into the holes. Now, Thomas doesn't do that, actually. He falls down and says, my Lord and my God. But Jesus then says something interesting, which is also applicable to us. He says, Thomas, you're blessed because you've seen and have believed, but much more blessed is everybody since, which includes anyone who believes now, who haven't seen and have believed. So I believe that if we have doubts and difficulties and we're struggling and we feel maybe some of you have been through terrible suffering and you feel angry with God or you feel deserted by God, that's okay. God knows how he feels, no point trying to deceive him. But I believe that God meets us in our suffering. And I believe that as we struggle on, all we have to do is to say, look, God, if you're there, show yourself to me. And that's been my experience in suffering, that as I've prayed that prayer, God has helped me and also helped my family.
I guess sort of one question that kind of probably a bit has been answered there is what kind of doubts do you struggle with and how do you overcome them?
Yeah. So everybody's different, right? And some people, friends of mine, even who are Christians, in a similar situation, doubt if God existed. I never felt that, but I do doubt. I do wonder sometimes if God's forgotten me, right? Or why is this going on? You know, what have I done, or what's happened to me? And you know, once I was on a beach with some friends, a very crowded beach, and we had our youngest son and his son, who were about 5 or 6, and my friend had to go back to the apartment to get something, and it was a very crowded beach, and I turned away for 30 seconds and I lost this guy's son on the beach, and we didn't find him for over an hour. It was the worst hour of my life. Thank God we found him in the end. Anyway, God isn't like that, and that's been my experience. And when I feel that, like, has God forgotten me, I think of a story in the Bible, and there's a kind of theme here, which is I believe that God's word is like a medicine chest, and if we're struggling and we go to the medicine chest and we treat it with his promises and the truth that's in that does us good. So the story that comes to mind is Jesus is in a boat and he's asleep, and the disciples are going from one side of the lake to the other. They're experienced fishermen, and a tremendous storm blows up and the boat is sinking, and the disciples become despairing, right? And they in the end, and Jesus is still asleep even though the boat is going under. And in the end, very roughly, they shake him and they wake him up, say, "Don't you care? We're going to drown." And that's a bit me, and that's a bit many of us, right? Don't you care? In suffering, we might doubt, does God exist? We might doubt, if he does exist, does he really care? Or is he just a kind of remote God? Well, Jesus gets up and he rebukes the waves and the wind, and suddenly it's a dead calm, which is a miracle. Billions of molecules are rearranged. And in the dead calm, it says something really strange. It says, then they were even more afraid. So the disciples are more afraid in a mill pond calmness than they were a few seconds earlier when the boat was sinking. Why? Because a bigger fear entered their life, if you like, the fear of God. And they began to dawn on them, well, who is this man who's asleep, this ordinary looking rabbi who's asleep? This is God. So sometimes in life, we may think that as Christians, that God is asleep and he doesn't care. Of course, God knows everything that's happening. He's not asleep, but sometimes he may allow us to go through experiences. The story ends with the disciples coming to the other side of the lake. And that's the Christian promise that God makes to anyone who will trust in him. I'll bring you to the other side, and the other side is through death, right? So if you're a Christian and you're feeling those doubts and difficulties, God is in your boat, even if you feel he's asleep, and he promises. His character, I believe, is trustworthy and reliable. We can trust him. He will bring us to the other side. And if you haven't got Jesus in your boat, then he wants to get in, right? That's the Christian offer. Yeah, the presence of God to know Jesus Christ. He's inviting himself into your boat. And all of us need an answer to death. And we also need an answer not just to physical death, but to separation from God, which is the ultimate human problem we have, that we're heading in the wrong direction. We need to do a U-turn, to repent, is what the Bible says, and come back to God. So yeah, that when I feel those doubts, it's stories like that speak to me, and I believe that story to be true, and speak to me of the character of God, that he's trustworthy.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm just reading a couple of, do you find yourself upset that God hasn't healed you?
That's a great question. In a way, I'm not healed, right, but I'm alive. And that's amazing. In fact, last time I saw the doctor, he said, we just had a kind of group review of your case. And the other oncologists were kind of rather surprised that you're alive, which is like, thanks a lot. So, of course, it would be nice to have it go away. But I trust God that he knows what he's doing. And I trust God that he's given me this, incurable prognosis, which is basically that I've got the same size tumors as I had 5 years ago. But he's also given me extra time, like it's like a football match. Suddenly you get an extra 30 minutes, right, which you weren't expecting. And I just love doing this. I absolutely love telling people about what I believe is an answer to death. And, it would be, if I didn't do that, in fact, if any Christian didn't do that, it's a bit like having a vaccine for coronavirus and not telling people about it, right? Mm-hmm. If I got one or developed one and I didn't share it, that would be really cruel. So as Christians, we're not saying we're better than anybody else. We're not. We're actually, we're the same or even worse. What we're saying is someone's given us the answer, the vaccine, if you like, and we want to tell other people about it. So I love doing that. I don't know how long I'm going to live, but I'm really happy to be alive, and yeah, grateful for extra time.
I've got a couple of questions that might be easy to join together, although slightly different. So one of them says that she's got a close friend near to death, a committed Christian. How do I support her? And she's very lonely, obviously. I think probably COVID times and everything here, and things are hard to make contact. How do I support and counsel her? And another one, which is slightly different. What would you say to somebody who is at high risk of getting cancer? I'm guessing that question is maybe something familial or something.
Yeah. On the first one, yeah, it's a really good question, because it's easy to say the wrong thing. I think in general, communicating with people who've got cancer, little and often is the best way. And also to put in a communication, if you send them a message or something, I don't expect a reply, because sometimes you just feel terrible, right? And sometimes the challenge can be you get lots of people sending you nice messages. You think, oh, I must get back. I think practical help can help. When I was first diagnosed, we had lots of people in the church who helped us with meals. Now things are a bit more stable. We don't need that, but that was really a kind of expression of solidarity, which is great. The thing for a Christian, I would say, is, especially if you're able to, be with them or talk to them, is just I would recommend read a psalm. There's such power in the Psalms. Psalm 34 says, "The angel of the Lord encamps around the dwelling of the just to deliver them." So there's this image of we're sort of camping in a hospital bed or something. Around us is the angel of the Lord, which Christians believe is the name for Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. So I find there's tremendous comfort in the Psalms, and the Bible is just, I just find an amazing book, right? If you've never looked at it, it's the world's best-selling book, and I know it's maybe a difficult book to understand. I would just have a chat with it about a Christian friend. I've got this thing here, for example, which is John's Gospel. It's got John's Gospel down one side and then notes on the other side, and that's, could work with someone in cancer or just anyone who wants to have a look in it. Now, Rachel, I've forgotten your second question. What was the second one?
No, don't worry. The second one was, what would you say to someone who was at risk?
Oh, yeah. My children worried about that because they were wondering if it was familial. After some tests, they decided probably not. I think all of these things are a test of trust, right? Now, there obviously maybe humanly things we can do, and it's good to get screening. And I would absolutely encourage anyone who's got a lump or any kind of strange thing, get it checked out. With cancer, speed is everything. Probably the reason humanly I'm alive is my wife said, "You've got that lump, stop delaying, go to the GP," which I did 8-9 years ago. But I would say if that person was a Christian or maybe thinking about Christian things, just ask God for help. Just ask God for help. Help me, Lord, is a good prayer. That doesn't mean we're never going to get cancer or we're going to be cured. No, it doesn't. We have a friend, it's really tragic, who just died in the last few days, a month after having been diagnosed, with pancreatic cancer. And those things are really hard, and they shake you. So we have no glib answers as Christians, and all we can do is just point people to the suffering Savior, Jesus Christ. So it's hard, isn't it, in a situation where you think I might get it, and that fear and anxiety can play on your mind. The thing that comforts me then, because every time I go for a scan, I get the results. It's called scanxiety, right? You're worried about the results, and I just struggle and pray, God help me, and I believe He has, and I believe that obviously one day I will die, and then I'll go to be with Him.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just having
One more.
I think probably one more. It's quite tricky. Is there anything that you wish you would have had the opportunity to do but didn't get the chance? Or you can choose which one you answer. How is cancer fair if God is supposed to be good?
Yeah, I'll take not particularly, although I do wish I'd worked a bit less hard. Nobody on their deathbed says they wish they'd spent more time in the office. Is cancer fair? That's a really profound question. I would say life is not fair, but I mean that in a good way, because actually God could justifiably say all of us have done terrible things, even if we've never, Jesus said, even if you've never done something, if we hate someone, that's like wishing they were dead. Or if we looked at another person and we said we'd like to sleep with them, that's the same as actually doing that. So life in a way isn't fair, because actually we deserve nothing, but God gives us time. The Bible says that God's patient. God's very, very patient, not infinitely patient, but patient, not wanting any to perish, not wanting anyone to go away from Him eternally, but everyone to come to know Him through His Son. So I would say that in fairness, God is more than fair. In fact, it's what the Bible calls grace, right? Grace is a gift that we don't deserve. So we are like I'll finish with this. I'll just come back to the story of the prodigal son. Maybe some of you remember it. It's a son who says to his father, I wish you were dead. I want your money. The father gives him half the money, he blows it on wild living. He ends up in a pigsty, which for a Jewish boy is the worst place. And he comes to his senses. He says, this is crazy. I must go home to my father. But he says, I can't be a son again, but I'll be a slave, right? That's what the boy thinks about fairness, right? I've been so terrible to my father, God, right? That I could be a slave, and to be a slave is better than to be in the pigsty. But the wonderful thing Jesus says is when the boy is thinking of pig's muck, he's a long way off, his father sees him and runs to him and throws his arm around him. And that's a picture of God with us. So God is more than fair. He loves us, he's kind, and he doesn't want any to perish. He wants everyone to come home. Now, the pigsty, life is in a way a pigsty. It's a vale of tears. Now, coronavirus maybe exposes a little bit just what life is like, which is sad, right? And ultimately leads to death. But there is an answer to death. There is a way out of the pigsty, and the way is come home to God, come home to the Father. And when we start on that way home, when we take one step towards the Father God, he runs to meet us, which is amazing.
Yeah, amazing grace. Jeremy, thanks so much for what you've shared with us tonight, for being willing to do that, spend time and even field sort of any question at the end there. I'm sorry if we've not asked all the questions that came in. We've tried to not make the evening go on too long. But thank you to those of you who have asked questions this evening as well and contributed in that way. I mentioned earlier that Jeremy had written a book, something of these experiences, explaining a bit more what he's tried to explain and share with us tonight. I'll hold it up here. You can see the cover of the book, but Beyond the Big Sea. If you'd like a copy of that book, if you want to know more, to read more, then please do email us at the church. So you can use the email address hello@cheambaptist.net and give us your address, your postal address, and we will post a copy of the book to you. It won't cost you anything, but we'd be willing to do that. We'd love to share that with you. So do get in touch with us. I think that email address will appear in the chat so that you can see and jot down if you want it. hello@cheambaptist.net.
We're aware that there might be things that you've wanted to ask over Zoom tonight, but haven't been able to and would still like to talk about. So please do get in touch with us. I think on the screen now is going to be a link or links to the churches. So do get in touch to one that's local to you. And we do believe that Jesus can bring help and hope in the face of suffering and death. So please do that.
And if maybe tonight that what Jeremy's shared about his trust in the Gospels and knowing who Jesus is and what he's done and even how he comes off the pages, as it were, to meet us. Our next event on Zoom, which again is in collaboration with these other churches, is an evening on Zoom on Wednesday, the 2nd of December, with somebody called Dr. Peter Williams. We've entitled it, This is the Nativity Nonsense. Again, just digging around really in this. Can we trust the Gospels? Are they reliable historically? Do they stand up? And with these huge questions that we're asking, or the huge answers that we're pinning on the Gospels, is that a safe place to look? And again, that evening there'll be the chance for Q&A for you to ask questions if you'd like to, or if you've got friends who you think that would be helpful, please do invite them along, and they're welcome to join us on that evening. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of December, again at the same time at 8 o'clock. Jeremy, I think Peter Williams. What would you say with us just as a final?
Oh, he's a lot smarter than me. Yeah, he's a great guy. Yeah, so if you're watching this and you're not a Christian, I would please invite you, kick the tires, right? It's like buying a car. Look into it.
Yeah.
Discover if it's true. Decide for yourself. And Peter is a great person. He's a master of a Cambridge college called Tyndale House. And he spent his whole life looking at the Gospels and other parts of the Bible. So as skeptical as you like, and come and ask him. Come and see if it's true.
Great.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Particularly thanks to Jeremy, but we thank everyone else, and we trust and wish you a good night, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thanks.